So I did Beyond the Clay, and this is about my travels to Nicaragua and Japan. And I went to both for ceramics. I went to Nicaragua just 2 months ago, and then Japan about a year ago. And even though I was focusing on ceramics, I like to think that it was more of a lens through which to view the rest of their culture rather than a narrow focus. And I'd like to expand upon that in my presentation. So first I'm going to talk about Nicaragua. So these are all the different places that I went. We stayed mostly on the western part. And we got to travel a lot. We didn't really stay in the same spot for a whole day ever. Maybe we slept in the same town 2 minutes in a row, but we were always traveling. And we got to see lots of different parts, from the big cities to the tiny little towns with no internet or phone lines or anything. So that was a really great experience. One place in particular that really made an impact on me was Santa Rosa, which you can see right up here. And the reason it was such an influential place was because it's actually a socialist community where everybody lives together, and they have a forest plot of land that they replanted in order to provide food for themselves, and they go and they dig clay from this forest in order to support themselves. And everybody has to give 10% of what they make to the community, and they have a president that they nominate every year that runs the community for them. And so I thought this was a great insight into like different government systems and how people can unite to support each other. I got to see a lot of different artwork, so since I was going there for ceramics, there was definitely a huge influence on how I make my ceramics. You can see these are some of the nicer works that they make that are highly polished and they're much more famous, but I also saw some more rustic works, I guess. And they don't use any glaze, which is very special. What they do is they polish colored clay. So this bottom pot would have been polished like 11 times in order to get this finished product. So it's a very intensive process. Aside from the ceramics, I also got to experience the food, of course. Lots of rice and beans and plantains. That was my main diet down there. And I also got to experience life through a guide. So we had 2 guides who were native to Nicaragua, and they drove us around, and I didn't speak Spanish, so I couldn't communicate with them as well as I would have hoped, but I still got to learn a lot from them. And also we had a guide, Robert, who was head of Fathers for Peace, and we got to go around to all these different communities where we learned about Fathers for Peace and how they're helping people make money and make a living, and also help other people through clay. So one of the main things that we learned about were water filters. And as you can see down in the left-hand corner, these are water filters, and they're made out of clay with sawdust in them. And then once it's fired, the sawdust leaves pores, and you can put water into it, and the water will go through, but all the bacteria will stay behind. So it purifies their water, and that's a huge issue because it's really hard to get clean water in these countries because they don't have a lot of money. And so what Fathers for Peace does is they go through and they set up factories for people and then give them the supplies that they need in order to maintain these factories. So they're not actually making money off of them, they're just helping other people do them. So this is the most low-key one that we saw, and you can see this is a press over here, and they just use a car jack to press each individual thing, and then they fire them in this kiln over here. And then if you go ahead to, and then this is the large-scale one that we saw, and they had a whole warehouse full of water filters, and these are the 6 kilns that they used to fire them. Another great part about Nicaragua was I also got to use clay. So I got to see, everybody digs their own clay locally. So the clay differs from every part of the country. And I got to experiment with the different types and see what different styles people were using. And I also got to work with soapstone and do carving. think the main lesson I took away from Japan, or from Nicaragua, was how clay can be functional and how it can serve to help people as pottery, like for food or for cooking or the water filters. And the people there, they use clay as a way of life to make a living. In that, in the U.S., you know, your parents want you to go get an education and get a good job first, and then maybe secondly you can try and do ceramics. But in Nicaragua, they want you to learn ceramics first in case you know, your med school doesn't work out, and then you have to do all that. Now Japan was a huge contrast to that because it was much more of a philosophical thing, and they've had a lot more history. Nicaragua didn't have a lot of museums with their traditional pottery because a lot of it's been destroyed and lost. But I also got to see potters who are still making traditional works. So I still got to learn about the history in that regard because people are still doing it. But I didn't get to see a lot of ancient pieces because most of them have been destroyed. But in Japan, pottery is a long-standing tradition because they have Yeoman pottery, which is some of the oldest pottery known in the world. And they prize pottery very much, and it's a very strong part of their history. So in Japan we went to many different places as well, and I think this was the biggest contrast within a country because we went to Tokyo, which is a huge city, and then we also went all the way out to Machiko, which is a tiny little pottery town based totally on pottery, and also Shigaraki, which is where I got to stay with a family. And I thought that was a really big insight into Japanese culture because I stayed with this family and they gave me food, and we didn't really, the mother spoke English, but I didn't know any Japanese, and her family didn't know any English, so we kind of sat down and talked about music, or we built things online and did things like that to try and communicate. And I got to see kind of what their houses are like, and it's funny because they all have really nice cars with big, they have like screens and things that'll tell you where you're going and things like that. So Japan, I only got to meet one potter, or one famous potter, but he is a very famous potter, and he is Shio Kanzaki, and he is famous for his firework. He does wood fire kilns, and his main lesson in pottery was about the philosophy of it. So he never tried to recreate an effect that he would get from firing a pot. It was more about like a way of life, like just to keep your mind moving and things like that. He didn't view it as a science, and he really prized organic shapes, you know, and asymmetry and things like that.
You have to finish up.
Okay. So I think that the major contrast between the two was that Nicaragua showed me how functional pottery can be and how it can serve to help people, and Japan showed me how it can shape cultural values and how it can kind of help you lead your own life.